So let's continue on with chapter 1 of Frowe's work, The Ethics of War and Peace. So in chapter 1, I've already given you, I've done a previous video on chapter 1, but I want to pick up on that. And now we're looking at permissible defense. And we've seen that that's sort of Frowe's entry point into the discussion of ethics of war. Now, permissible defense, she's going to break it up into a number of issues to discuss. And we're going to start by looking at proportionality and necessity, because that's, again, there is this agreement that those concepts are pretty well baked in. They're really presupposed by the notion of permissible defense. That is, they're necessary conditions. The question is, though, and the answer is no, to are they sufficient? No, they're not, but they're important. So since they're critical to this concept of permissible defense, let's start by having a look at them. And then to flesh them out, like what's beyond the necessary, like what makes it something sufficient, we have various accounts of self-defense, the culpability, rights-based, and the responsibility theory of self-defense. And then last but not least, a look at at one of the standard things that comes up in a variety of practical ethics, you know, from biomedical to warfare, and that's the doctrine of double effect. All right, so let's start by looking at one of the key concepts underlying permissible defense, and this concept of proportionality. So when we're talking about whether it's okay to defend oneself, we talk about this, whether there is a way to compare the defensive harm that you're being attacked, you're going to cause some harm to your attacker because your attacker is threatening you with harm. So there's got to be, they have to be related in some way, right? And the question is how. So we want to be doing some kind of comparison to the defensive harm that you being attacked, victim if you like the victim is going to cause the perpetrator or the attacker harm, and the attacker is threatening to harm. But the whole idea is that you're defending yourself so that you don't suffer the harm. So what can you do in advance to defend yourself? What kind of harm can you cause to your attacker when your attacker is threatening you to harm you? So how do we measure this? How do we relate these? So I've listed this. So think of the defensive harm as inflicted as X and the threatened harm as Y. Well, if it's the threatened harm is kill and the defensive harm is kill, then basically it's pretty straightforward. It's just identity. Kill, right? So that doesn't seem at least hard to adjust proportionality, because you're basically the same thing. It's kind of an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth kind of thinking. And of course, Gandhi said that leaves us, eye for an eye blinds us both. But in any case, it's a very straightforward job to do the proportionality when the acts are identical. They're basically the same thing. They're in the same class, killing and killing. So X and Y are in the same class, so it's identity. But what about, if you're threatened, let's say the threatened harm is not quite killing. Let's say it's some nasty kind of torture, right? Could you kill to defend yourself from undergoing a nasty torture, right? Something like that. So there is the case when I'm going to put a little line through that. Whoop, let's see. There we go. When it's not the same, right? So killing, and it's not going to be identical to the not kill, because the not killing in this case is the threatened harm is let's say like torture or something like that, and you're killing in self-defense. Could we compare those two? They're not identical. So in that sense, we've got a difference. Okay, and then that opens up the possibility of a continuum. Because once you say that maybe, yeah, we could kill in self-defense to a threatened harm that isn't killing, but it's bad, like they're going to, do something terrible to me, but not necessarily kill me. But we could say things that we often do that, well, even if you're not killed, there are terrible things that can happen to you. And yes, you could kill your attacker to prevent those things from happening. So we're now in this magnitude where we would say, okay, yeah, because the defensive harm, the killing, is okay to kill to defend yourself from being tortured, because you know what, that torturing is pretty well as bad as killing, right? So there is a sense of bringing the two back in line by the as bad as, right? Kind of like a magnitude, as Frowe says, kind of in the same magnitude class, right? So it's not identity, but, one's as bad as the other. So proportionality can be argued as holding in the case. So yeah, if you're threatening me with a horrible thing like torture, and it's going to happen, it would be proportionate, right? Because I'm to kill you in my self-defense because, like torture in that case, that's as bad as killing. And so I'm not really going over the top or whatever. I'm doing something that is arguably commensurate. But the minute you knock out identity and you create a difference, yeah, I use something really nasty like torture. What about if you threatened me and I had to defend myself against you, not just coming to torture me, but let's say you want to, I don't know, this is pretty gruesome stuff, but like paralysis or kidnapping or something that's really bad, but may not intuitively strike us as bad as torture. Would I get to kill in that case? Could I kill myself to prevent myself from being kidnapped, right? Well, now we might say, well, kidnapping, it may not pass this magnitude test. We may say something like kidnapping really isn't as bad as murder. Kidnapping isn't as bad as torture, right? So the as bad as the magnitude kind of approach might not work. We might need something like a threshold type of analysis. And we often use threshold ways of thinking in order to do practical ethics, right? We often think that once something hits a certain level, then we say, yeah, the concept is in place. So let me give you an example. So you might say something like, well, there's a number of things, there's a number of threatened harms that you can do to me that are not identical with killing, but they would hit the right threshold. They're significantly bad enough. They may not be as bad as, they're certainly not identical. So something like, yes, threatening to kidnap me and, and forcible confinement and all that stuff, that meets a threshold. That's bad enough, right? It's not maybe as bad as killing, which I'm going to do in my self-defense. But you know what? There's lots of things that maybe not as bad as killing, but they meet the threshold level. It is significantly significantly serious, as Frowe says. It's significantly serious to threaten me with a harm like kidnapping such that I can legitimately kill in self-defense. So this certainly doesn't solve the problem, but what this is showing is that when we're looking at war, right, and every time we're looking at violence, we are looking not at sort of the philosophically easy ones where eye for an eye, where it's cases of identity. Those ones can be tricky enough, but at least the proportionality issue is fairly straightforward. Pretty well all the time in warfare, we're looking at these kinds where there's a difference and you're trying to weigh them, and it's not even clear as to the methodology that you should use in comparing and contrasting different kinds of harms, right? So the whole game here of proportionality is figuring out how the harms should be related, right? Both in terms of whether they're equal, identity, and if there's a difference, is it sort of an as bad as kind of a magnitude, or are we talking about a threshold? And if we have a threshold, then we have a number of other considerations to make. But there you go. So there's your first thing. Proportionality is baked in, is necessary. It's part of the notion of a permissible self-defense. And in the next video, I'm going to shift and we'll look at the other one that's part of the story, that's a necessary part of the story, namely necessity itself. See you next video.